Enjoy the show! All random, all middle. ARAM for short, a game mode whose origin started as nothing but a custom game, far separated from its more macro-oriented counterpart, has evolved from just a fringe game played by enthusiasts to really a staple of what people expect from a modern MOBA. And chances are, if you're familiar with the likes of League, HOTS, or Smite, you've probably played at least one of these games before. Fast, casual, and chaotic are usually some of the words people would describe ARAM. A way of playing really, I want to say, for thousands or maybe even millions of people. And when's the last time you played? Only played a game or two because you had some time to kill waiting for someone to come on? Did you main the game but now quit except for the occasional ARAM with your friends? Or are you someone that now only exclusively plays ARAM? But to tell you the truth, the reason doesn't really matter because regardless of why you're playing or how long you're playing or how you're playing, you're queuing up for a game just like anybody else. And I think that's one of the biggest appeals of ARAM, is that it's trying to keep the same foundational game that you either liked or liked at one point in time and changing it into something new and more digestible. You might not think about why you play it or why you might enjoy it, but I think it's more than fair to say that ARAMs have changed the perspective of MOBAs from essentially what was and arguably still is a high barrier to entry game into something that is at least a little more casual, and is a structural piece of what a game needs to offer to keep people happy, at least in the long run. Regardless if you're a ranked player and ARAM only main, or you'd be surprised at how common this is, someone who's only playing this game because they have someone else that plays. It was popularized by League during Season 1 and made into an official mode in 2012. Since then, it's spread across to other MOBAs, whether officially or unofficially. And because of this, I think people overlook just how big of an impact ARAM had in maintaining and catering to what would otherwise be an pretty alienated player base. Nowadays, if you want to play a game in ARAM, it's as simple as opening the client, pressing find match, and waiting for the queue to pop. You'll find what is likely a dedicated map, ARAM-specific balance changes, hero rerolls, and so on and so forth. You get the point. It's all very straightforward and very standardized, and I'm certainly not saying that's a bad thing. All of this is made with the intention of streamlining what is essentially a game mode already catered to casual players. And yet the origins of ARAMs were really anything but. They were really popularized by League during its early days where people would initially host custom lobbies just titled ARAM. And when people joined, it was just a common expectation that they would simply play by the rules. For everything from manually pressing random to get a champion, to not going back to heal or recall when you're low, and even not going to push the side lanes or hit the jungle camps during your spare time. In the early days, it wasn't uncommon at all to get people that broke these rules, whether intentionally because they wanted to cheat or grief, or more commonly really because they just weren't familiar with any of this at all. And for the longest time, all of this was done using the original map, with nothing of the base game changed at all. So imagine if you were complaining about getting poked down in a game now, from something like Ashe, Xerath, Chromie, or whatever you have in your game. And now just imagine how bad it must have felt back then. Yet, despite all of this, people still played on. And all of this got a boost when, during a unintentional update of the tutorial system, Riot added the tutorial map to be now available in custom lobbies, which coincidentally also had one lane, and looks mighty similar to what Howling Abyss actually looked like. So after seeing the popularity and demand for an official ARAM mode, it was added in 2012, where it has only seen more and more dedicated changes in an attempt to balance the game. In fact, between when I first had this idea and when the video came out, the old Howling Abyss map was completely removed and replaced with a new arcane themed one in commemoration with the show, complete with a new rework to the map that did its best to address the old and super narrow choke points that was always kinda hard to play around for melee heroes. Since then, pretty much every major MOBA that's come out has had some version of ARAM, be it League, Smite, HOTS, or HON. And while all fun, I think it's important to ask ourselves, why was this needed in the first place? And to really answer this question, I'll instead ask you two separate ones instead. What is a MOBA, and why are they so unforgiving? Now, I think there's no clear definition of what a MOBA is, nor do I think there really needs to be one for our sake. Rather, I think it's better to ask ourselves, what are some common things that we expect out of any new MOBA game that comes out? You likely think of individual heroes, lanes and creeps, items, maybe talents, or some sort of player choice and customization, and lots and lots and lots of teamfighting. But what you probably didn't think of was just the macro aspect of it. The map, the objectives, and of course the ancient nexus, or whatever you want to call it. It's really obvious, especially when we're talking about it in hindsight, and it's arguably just as important as anything else I mentioned, and yet for a lot of players, it's really only an afterthought. And I think the answer to this question really ties into the second one, of why MOBAs are so unforgiving at times. Something that can be so rewarding and fun to get good at with so many layers, yet bogged down at times at just how hard it is to get into, or even how to get back into. Picture this, it's a normal day for you. You wanted to go and play some Dota just because you felt like it. You were definitely comfortable with the game a few years ago, somewhat a few months ago, and less so a few days ago. Still though, you played this game for a really long time, so it shouldn't be very hard for you to hop back on and play a game or two, right? But little do you know that while you do have an idea of how things are, it feels odd at times, like as if you're going back to your room with everything slightly rearranged. And really, that's why MOBAs are so unforgiving, because not only are there a lot of layers to manage through, the live service aspect of it makes it hard to keep up with all the changes. This is purely anecdotal, but I felt like that whenever I jumped back into Mania game, there was always that period of having to relearn and get familiarized with the game again. And I want to emphasize that this is by far not something that's exclusive to MOBAs, but rather say that it's certainly part of the reason as to why it is so unforgiving. When I asked you earlier to think about MOBAs, this is part of the reason why. Because most of all of what you listed, the parts you likely found fun and enjoyable, can be found in ARAM. Random heroes, one lane, and most importantly, no macro. So much so that it becomes more reminiscent of an arena battler at times than it does a MOBA. But still, for those familiar with the game, it's a nice relief to play without all the tense, I guess you could say relearning that you would have to do. And that's my biggest point. ARAMs have changed MOBAs by attempting to break the stigma that's really often associated with this genre of games, for both people that are new as well as existing players that just drop in every now and then. And playing ARAM often means that you really only have to keep up with the aspects of the game that most people find fun and apparent, such as the heroes, items, and the teamfights. And in my opinion, it really helps that games make an active effort to advertise and cater with this audience in mind, by focusing on the more chaotic and random aspect of it, rather than the more competitive nature of this game, such as not having a formalized ranking system. Still though, ARAM and the casual aspects of it are far from perfect, partially because just the nature of having any competitive game naturally will lead to people focusing on winning and trying hard. And the foundation of ARAM in most games is still built upon something that wasn't made for it at all. So it's not hard to imagine certain heroes, especially range or poke based ones, having a much easier time compared to some melee or macro oriented ones. And the first and second letter in ARAM? Yeah, the random part is something that I think most people would agree is pretty annoying at times. Still though, I think if anything, this highlights just how important it is for games to have a more casual oriented mode for people to enjoy. Earlier in the video, I talked about how League started all of this, but that wasn't entirely true, because there was already something similar in Dota by that time with a similar name. But as the years went on and Dota evolved into Dota 2, there was never that same push from Valve to add something similar to this, but rather they opted for a different approach called Turbo, which itself is just a modern version of Easy Mode, a more casual oriented version with less punishing deaths, faster games, and less macro for people. And while many people, including me, desperately want them to add ARAM, especially when there's a huge dedicated community playing what is the de facto official mode for it, it's good to see that Valve has an understanding of just how important it is to cater to a casual audience as well. You may have never played an ARAM game before in your life, and I'm not certainly going to ask you to start now, but I really do hope this opens your eyes as to just how important they are in one form or another. So as always, thanks for watching, until next time.